11 weeks after Jackie Robinson broke into the major leagues, a second black man walked onto a big league field, and almost no one remembers his name. His name was Larry Doby. On July 5, 1947, he pulled on a Cleveland uniform he had been handed less than an hour before. He was 23 years old. He had no minor league seasoning. No press campaign built around him. No careful plan drawn up to shield him from what was coming. The day before, he had been the second baseman for the Newark Eagles of the Negro Leagues. Now he was the first black player in the 76-year history of the American League. To understand what that cost him, you have to know who he was. Larry Doby grew up in Paterson, New Jersey, a four-sport star who lettered in baseball, basketball, football, and track. He served in the Navy in the Pacific during the Second World War. When he came home, he went back to the game, and by 1946 he was one of the best young players in black baseball, winning the Negro League World Series with the Eagles alongside a young Monty Irvin. In the summer of 1947 he was hitting well over .400 when a phone call changed his life. The man on the other end was Bill Veeck, the owner of the Cleveland Indians, a showman and a maverick who had wanted to integrate baseball for years. And Veeck did something rare. He actually paid for Doby's contract, sending money to the Eagles' owner, F.A. Manley, at a time when most teams simply raided the Negro Leagues and took their players for nothing. Then he brought Doby straight to the majors. No spring training. No slow build. Cleveland was in the middle of a pennant chase, and Veeck threw the kid directly into the fire. The team's manager, Lou Boudreau, walked the young man down the length of the clubhouse to introduce him to his new teammates. Some of them turned away. Some kept their hands in their pockets. A few shook his hand. Several would not. Imagine it. Your first day at the highest level of the sport you have given your whole life to, and half the room refuses to touch you. That afternoon Doby pinch hit, and struck out. The next day they sent him out to play first base, a position he had barely played, and no one on his own team would lend him a first baseman's mitt. He had to borrow a glove from a player on the other side. This is the part of the story the history books skip. We remember the first. We built a national holiday around the first. But there was a second man, in the very same summer, carrying the very same weight, and he did it in near silence. Larry Doby integrated half of Major League Baseball. And the country barely looked up. Because everyone was watching the other man, and Doby was left to face it almost entirely alone. Here is what people misunderstand about being second. When Jackie Robinson signed with Brooklyn, Branch Rickey built an entire plan around him. A full season in the minor leagues to adjust. A script for the abuse. A famous promise to turn the other cheek. The eyes of the whole country were on Brooklyn, invested in whether the experiment would work. Doby had none of that. He arrived in the middle of a race for the pennant, dropped into a clubhouse that had never asked for him, and was expected to perform immediately, or become living proof that the whole idea should be abandoned. And the abuse was identical. The slurs pouring out of enemy dugouts. Fastballs thrown at his skull. The hotels that turned him away while his teammates slept inside. The restaurants that served everyone but him. Base runners who came in with their spikes high. First baseman who spat as he passed. Doby said later that the hardest part was not the crowds. It was the loneliness, having no one around him who understood. He and Robinson took to calling each other late at night, two men in two different leagues, sharing the same silence, holding each other up across the distance. They had never planned it this way, two pioneers, splitting the weight of a whole people's hopes between two leagues. But that is exactly what happened. Whatever Robinson felt in Brooklyn, Doby felt in Cleveland, and in every American League city that had never seen a black man in a visiting uniform before. But Larry Doby could play. He moved from the infield to center field and turned himself into one of the finest defensive outfielders of his era. He hit for power that made pitchers pay for coming inside. And by 1948, the raw rookie who couldn't get a handshake had become a genuine star, and Cleveland was headed to the World Series. In Game 4, Doby launched a home run that won the game. The next morning, a photograph ran in newspapers all across America. It showed Larry Doby, still in his uniform, cheek pressed against the cheek of the winning pitcher, Steve Gromick, a white man from Michigan, both of them laughing with pure, uncomplicated joy. It does not sound like much today. In 1948 it was radical. A black man and a white man, embracing, celebrating one another, printed on the front pages of a nation that still enforced segregation by law. Gromick received hate mail for it. He said he didn't care in the slightest. Doby's home run had won him the biggest game of his life. That was all that mattered to him. Cleveland won the championship. Larry Doby became the first black player to hit a home run in a World Series, and the first to win one in the American League. He had answered every question the world never gave Robinson the time to ask of him. And still, when the story of breaking baseball's color line gets told, his is the name that goes missing. Why does the second man disappear? We remember firsts because a first is a clean line, a clear before, a clear after. The second feels like a footnote, a repeat, a lesser echo of something already done. But that math is a lie. Integration was not one door opened by one man on one afternoon. It was a wall pulled down brick by brick, over years, by people willing to bleed, and Larry Doby carried as many bricks as anyone who ever lived. He was a 7-time All-Star. He led the American League in home runs twice, and in runs batted in as well. In 1954, he led the league in both home runs and runs batted in, and his Cleveland team won an astonishing 111 games, a record that stood in the American League for decades. He was the engine of one of the greatest teams the sport had ever seen. And yet, say his name in a room today, and watch how many faces go blank. He was not finished making history, either. In 1978, Larry Doby became the manager of the Chicago White Sox, only the second black manager in the history of Major League Baseball. First to play in the American League, second in the dugout. His entire life, he seemed to arrive just behind the man the world had already decided to remember, and just far enough back to be forgotten himself. He rarely complained about it. When people asked, he would say that being second did not hurt any less. You simply did not get any credit for the pain. He didn't want his name remembered for the honor of it. He wanted it remembered because the truth was incomplete without him. And think about what his debut actually meant. Robinson had opened the National League. But baseball had two leagues, and the American League could have held the line for years. Doby made that impossible. The moment he walked onto that field in Cleveland, integration stopped being one team's experiment and became the future of the entire sport. Half the game changed the day he arrived, and hardly anyone said his name while it did. It took until 1998, 51 years after his debut, for the Hall of Fame to finally call. Larry Doby was inducted at last, an old man by then, standing at a podium where he should have stood decades before. He died 5 years later, in 2003. Here is why it matters. Every time we tell the story of a barrier falling, we crown a single hero and let everyone else fade into the background. It is easier that way. Cleaner. Better for a plaque and a highlight reel. But real progress is almost never the work of one person. It is the famous one, and the ones right behind them, taking the same blows with none of the reward, making certain that the first would not also be the last. Jackie Robinson opened the door. Larry Doby is the reason it could never be shut again. One without the other is only half of the story, and for the better part of a century, half the story is all that most of us have ever been told. So here is the question worth sitting with. How many second men are missing from the histories we think we already know, the ones who paid the exact same price, and whose names we simply never learned to say? Follow for more.